You've seen
Close
the
your eyes
bones.
and imagine
You've
the
heard
sound
the
of
screams
iron
echo through
cauldrons
auction
bubbling.
halls long buried.
Not with super
You felt
meat,
the
but
cold
with
weight
liquid
of
metal,
iron
mercury
shackles.
sized for a
Now
child's
imagine
wrist.
236
But here's the
women
truth:
raising
you were never
those clay
supposed to
vessels to
connect.
their lips. The Viking
Swallowing
system
death
never
in a
died.
flood of silver
It
fire,
mutated,
convulsing
it
on the
adapted,
dirt floor
and
until
it
their
still
bodies
lives in the
snapped
structures
against
you move
themselves.
through every day.
That's what
Look
archaeologists
closely at their
uncovered at
methods,
Repton in 986
classification,
CE. Separation,
rows of women,
pricing of bodies,
mothers clutching
bureaucratic
daughters,
ledgers, religious
sisters
sanction,
holding each other,
psychological
their
leverage.
teeth still
Do those
coated in
tools sound
metallic
ancient?
residue.
Or do they
These weren't
sound
peasants.
familiar?
Governments
They were
today
wise
still
warriors,
reduce people to
women of
numbers on
status who
tax
held
rolls
keys
and
to
census
estate
sheets, who commanded
Corporations
servants,
treat human
who managed
attention
wealth.
labor.
Yet when the
Even your
Viking
very
war
desires
host
as
finally
commodities
collapsed
to
on
be
English
extracted
soil,
and sold,
these
the
women chose
Vikings changed
mercury.
bodies. Death
So
today,
violent
systems
it
shattered
chained
bones,
bones because
different masks,
they knew
same
what
machinery.
waited.
The Norse
Outside
enslaved
the
women by
longhouse was
threatening
worse.
their children.
And here's the truth that
Today,
no history
institutions
teacher dares tell
enslave
you.
men by
They
threatening
knew
their
this fate
identity,
because they had
their
ordered it
status,
themselves.
their very sense
They had
of self.
watched the captives
Fear
arrive
of being
on the
discarded,
longships,
canceled,
Irish
broken
girls
by the
dragged in
system.
chains.
That fear keeps
Saxon
men
wives
docile.
stripped naked on auction
It
blocks.
keeps them selling their
Frankish
hours for
nobles'
wages,
daughters sold like cattle.
surrendering privacy.
The wives
for
of Norsemen
convenience,
weren't just
submitting
victims.
their autonomy
They
for
were
the illusion of
administrators of
safety.
cruelty.
Just as
They knew
Viking
the system
captives
because
sang
they had
prayers to
profited
gods who
from it.
never came.
That's why
Modern men
when the
whisper
wheel
prayers
turned
to
and their men
systems
lay
that
dead in
promise
foreign
freedom
mud,
while tightening chains.
they didn't hesitate.
And here's the
They drank
darkest
mercury
truth.
together.
Once you see it,
because
you
they knew
cannot
exactly
unsee it.
what had
The
been
same
done to other
techniques
women
that made mercury
and what
look
would now be
merciful
done
to
to them.
236.
Listen carefully.
Noble women
Can
now
you
make
hear it?
compliance
The
look
hammering
rational
of
to
shackles,
billions. The clatter
That's
of
the
chains.
evolution of control.
Auctioneers in Dublin
The faces
shouting
of power
prices over
learned
the
from the
weeping of
ancients.
children. They learned how to
20
weaponize
silver
belief,
pieces for the
how to
virgin under
sanctify
16.
submission, 15
How to
for a
wrap
woman
slavery.
deemed fertile, in ritual
10
so
for
the
anyone
captive
over
not
30.
only accepts
Systematic,
his chains but
calculated,
polishes them.
efficient.
So I ask you,
This
will you drink the
wasn't
poison
random
or will you
brutality.
awaken?
It was industrialized
Because this
human
knowledge is a
trafficking.
threshold,
You
perfected
are no
centuries
longer an
before
innocent
anyone dared
listener.
call it by
You
name.
are implicated.
The Vikings
The
built
rabbit hole
facilities
has no
for it.
bottom.
Stone
And
foundations
foundations.
irreversible. Drainage
You have
channels
glimpsed the
carved
truth.
into bedrock.
Systems that
Iron
thrive
rings
on
bolted to
despair.
walls at measured
Elites
intervals.
who profit from
Warehouses
suffering.
of misery.
Institutions
Institutions
that
forged
turn
in
your
3
life
sizes.
into their ledger.
Large for
The
men,
women at Repton
medium for
chose
women,
death
and
over
small.
chains.
But
So
you,
small they
your
could
war
only
is
fit
different.
the wrists of
You don't
children
fight with
no older
swords.
than 7.
You fight with
Every
awareness,
measurement
with
proves it.
identity.
Every
With
artifact
the refusal
proves
to
it.
be used as
The
raw
Norse didn't
material
just raid
for someone
villages.
else's machine.
They engineered a
That is
system
why you are
designed to
here.
break families.
That is why you listen
reduce
this
human
far.
lives to livestock.
And that is why I leave
and
you with
harvest
this
wealth
from flesh.
The Vikings
This is where
are
your
not
descent
gone.
begins.
The truth
They have
isn't
only
that
changed
Vikings
their
were
flags.
savage warriors.
The system
The
remains.
truth is that they
And now
created
you know
one
it.
of the earliest, most efficient psychological and economic machines of slavery the world had ever seen. And what terrifies me most is how familiar their system feels. The official records tell us raids were about glory, about gold, about pagan vengeance against Christendom, but that is only the mask. Pull it away, and what you see is a machine designed to exploit the most vulnerable resource of all, human bodies. At Hedeby, Birka, and Gotland, archaeologists uncovered the same structures as Dublin: holding pens, auction blocks, stock-checking rooms where veterinarians examined slaves like cattle, teeth pulled apart, bellies pressed for signs of pregnancy, tongues inspected for disease. The sick were deemed worthless. They were drowned. The splash into dark water was their final ledger entry, merchandise written off. Think of that bureaucracy for a moment. Not raiders acting on impulse, but administrators, taxmen, and priests blessing sales. King Ethel's tax ledgers from 8 and 12. Prove it. 2 silver coins per head sold through English ports. Imagine the cold efficiency of that. Women stumbling in chains while clerks tallied columns of figures, stamping documents with the same ink that would sanctify marriages, treaties, and holy decrees. Institutions, church and crown, did not just look away. They legitimized the system, profited from it, and built their stability on the suffering of the conquered. And here is the psychological truth that gnaws at me. This wasn't merely about money. It was about control. The Norse understood leverage. Keep mothers where they can see their children but never touch them. Separate virgins from the others to preserve value. Make women watch as the weak are culled, so they know compliance is survival. Every design choice was psychological warfare, crafted not just to break bodies but to collapse the will to resist. This was domination encoded into architecture, policy, ritual. Now ask yourself, why do 236 noble women at Repton choose mercury? Because they understood the system too well. They had lived inside it, overseen it, benefited from it. And when the iron turned against them, they faced the mirror of their own cruelty. They chose agony, convulsions, and blood over chains, degradation, and auction blocks. They knew the Viking system offered no survival, only transformation into property. Here's where your descent deepens. History tells you Vikings were warriors, but that's a child's version. The truth is darker. They were engineers of human despair, merchants of flesh, architects of psychological torment. And once you recognize that, you begin to see the pattern. Because systems like this don't vanish. They evolve. They dress themselves in new symbols, new languages, new bureaucracies. If you've followed me this far, write these words in the comments. Mercury is mercy. Mercury is mercy. Say it twice, lock it in. Because once you understand why death felt merciful to them, you'll never see power the same way again. There is a reason the Vikings were not ashamed. They cloaked their brutality in myth, sanctified it with ritual, and transformed slavery into something more than commerce. It became ideology. To the Norse, capturing women was not merely a byproduct of war. It was the will of the gods. Odin demanded sacrifice. Freya, goddess of fertility, demanded offerings of womb and blood. When captives screamed, when wives were dragged from burning halls, their cries were framed as tribute, as fuel for divine order. This is the most terrifying aspect of Viking cruelty. It was justified as sacred. Imagine standing in a longhouse while a chained woman is presented before a chieftain. Her value spoken not in terms of humanity but in silver weights. Her fate bound not to morality but to myth. Priests whispered blessings over these transactions. Skalds, Norse poets, sang of the spoils of war, weaving rape and bondage into the fabric of heroism. To them, enslaving an enemy's wife wasn't shame. It was proof of strength, a mark of divine favor. The sagas you've read as adventure tales, they are encoded propaganda, normalizing horror. And here lies the manipulation. By binding atrocity to religion, they anesthetize the conscience. When women were marched in chains across frozen fields, when children's wrists were locked in shackles barely 4 inches wide, their suffering was not seen as cruelty, it was destiny. A cycle ordained by gods, confirmed by elders, and retold at feasts where mead foamed over oak tables. The system perpetuated itself not only through force but through belief. That is how you turn men into instruments of horror. They must believe they are righteous. But the wives of Norse warriors, the women who later chose Mercury, they knew the truth beneath the songs. They had seen captives broken, sold, and bred like livestock. They had given orders, bartered lives, stood at the center of the machine. And when their turn came, they did not pray to Odin for mercy. They chose death instead. That is the silent indictment carved into their bones. Their gods had no compassion. Their rituals had no escape. They drank poison because the system they helped sustain had erased all alternatives. Understand this. When power convinces you that cruelty is sacred, resistance collapses. That is the ultimate control system. One that enslaves not only the body, but the soul itself. And it is older, deeper, and far more enduring than you've been taught.